The neon reflection of the Manhattan skyline flickered off the wet asphalt of the Brooklyn Navy Yard as Evelyn Telles adjusted the rearview mirror of her Porsche. She wasn't waiting for a contact, nor was she running a classified operation, not anymore. At 62, after 40 years as a high-level logistics contractor for federal intelligence, her life was supposed to be silent, predictable, and entirely under her control. But as she watched the flashing red light on her encrypted home security dashboard, she knew her sanctuary in Dumbo had been breached. The subterranean garage door beneath her loft sat wide open, its military-grade locks bypassed from the inside. Her prized possession, a pristine, midnight black 2021 Porsche 911 Carrera bought in cash with her uncredited government pension, was gone. Evelyn didn't panic. Panic was for amateurs. She simply shifted her modest sedan into drive and navigated the narrow cobblestone alley near Washington Street, her foot hovering over the brake pedal as she approached her courtyard. Sitting on the wrought iron bench, casually sipping a glass of Evelyn's vintage red wine, was her daughter, Sarah. She didn't look like an intruder. She looked like someone who believed everything in the world belonged to her. Evelyn parked, leaving her groceries in the trunk, and walked slowly up the stone steps. "Where is my car?" Evelyn asked, her voice dangerously calm, calibrated by decades of handling high-stakes field interrogations. Sarah smirked, crossing her legs arrogantly. "Greg took it. He has a massive client meeting downtown, at a high-end private club near Wall Street. He needs to pull up looking like an absolute success, Mom, not like a guy struggling to make ends meet in the city." Evelyn stared at her, the silence stretching taut between them like a tripwire. "Greg took my car," she repeated. Sarah shrugged, entirely unbothered. "He deserves it more than you do right now. You just leave it sitting in the garage while you buy groceries in Brooklyn. He is out there trying to build a future for us in Manhattan. You should be happy to help." Evelyn did not argue. She did not raise her voice or display an ounce of emotion. She simply reached into her tailored coat, pulled out her smartphone, and unlocked the encrypted screen. "With his suspended license," she murmured. Sarah's smug smirk vanished instantly. Her face went deathly pale under the dimming afternoon light. She bolted upright from the bench, the wine sloshing wildly over the rim of the glass, staining the wooden deck planks. "What do you mean suspended?" Sarah stammered, her eyes tracking Evelyn's fingers as they moved across the phone screen. "I mean he received his third reckless driving violation 6 months ago on the FDR Drive and failed to pay the heavy municipal fines," Evelyn replied, never taking her eyes off her daughter. "I saw the official notice in your mail when I watered your plants last month in Williamsburg." Evelyn opened her phone dialer and deliberately typed 3 digits, 911. Her thumb hovered directly over the bright green call button. "Mom, stop," Sarah gasped, lunging forward to grab her mother's wrist. Evelyn took a sharp, calculated step back, establishing a hard physical boundary honed by years of self-defense training. "Do not touch me. You can't call the cops on your own son-in-law," Sarah panicked, her chest heaving as fear finally pierced her entitlement. "It's a felony. They'll arrest him, he'll lose his corporate job, and he'll go to prison." Evelyn looked at the green button on the screen. The truth was, involving local law enforcement meant endless police reports, federal clearances being questioned, and civil authorities dragging her high-performance machine into a chaotic NYPD impound lot. She did not need a man with a badge to handle a domestic breach. During her contract years in Washington and New York, Evelyn had managed specialized tracking assets far superior to municipal policing. She possessed something much more effective than the local law: total, uncompromising ownership. "You're right," Evelyn murmured softly, deleting the digits from the screen. "The police are far too slow, and they are far too easy on liabilities like Greg. I'll handle this myself." Evelyn closed the dialer and opened a proprietary, military-grade tracking interface integrated with her Porsche Connect network, a custom protocol installed through her former defense contacts. A dark tactical map popped up immediately, showing a bright red telemetry dot moving northbound on the Queensboro Bridge at 85 miles per hour, slicing through evening traffic. "What are you doing?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling as she watched her mother's cold, methodical composure. Evelyn did not answer. She tapped the satellite override menu and selected the remote engine immobilization command. The application prompted her for a high-security 32-character cryptographic key. She typed it in effortlessly, confirmed the execution, and locked her phone screen with a sharp snap. "I just disabled the fuel pump," Evelyn stated calmly. "He has about 30 seconds before the twin-turbo engine completely shuts down and starves the drivetrain." Sarah stared at her mother in pure, unadulterated disbelief. "You killed the engine. On a bridge. Are you insane? He will coast to a forced stop on the emergency shoulder right before the Long Island City exit," Evelyn answered, walking past her to unlock the heavy front door of the loft. German engineering is exceptionally intuitive under tactical overrides. Right on cue, Sarah's cell phone began to ring aggressively inside her designer handbag. She scrambled to answer it, her hands shaking so violently she nearly dropped the device. "Greg." "What happened?" She listened for a few seconds, her face contorting in extreme stress as frantic, distorted screaming echoed through the receiver. "What do you mean the car just died? Did you hit something on the bridge?" "No." Greg, calm down. Evelyn did not wait to hear the rest of his pathetic meltdown. She stepped into her sleek entryway, dropped her house keys on the console table, and turned back to face her panicked daughter. "Tell your husband," Evelyn interrupted, raising her command-trained voice just enough to cut through the phone line, "to leave the key fob under the driver's seat and step away from my vehicle immediately." Sarah lowered the phone, glaring at Evelyn with an explosive mixture of fear, realization, and pure anger. "He is stuck on the upper level of the Queensboro Bridge in a $5,000 suit. Mom, how is he supposed to get to his meeting in Midtown? He can walk to the nearest subway station in Queens, or he can hail a yellow cab." "I truly do not care," Evelyn said coldly. She stepped toward the porch chair where Sarah's purse rested, reached inside without hesitation, bypassing expensive makeup kits, and pulled out the heavy brass spare key to the loft that she had entrusted to her years ago. Evelyn dropped it into her coat pocket. "Hey, that's my key," Sarah protested, taking a step forward. "It's my property," Evelyn corrected smoothly, "and you are leaving it right now. Take your wine glass to the sink on your way out." Sarah stood there, vibrating with unearned privilege, waiting for her mother to break, apologize, or play the passive victim she had assumed Evelyn was since Arthur's death. But when Evelyn simply pointed a finger toward the street, Sarah turned on her high heels and stormed down the courtyard steps, leaving the spilled red wine to dry like old blood on the wood. Once the loft returned to absolute silence, Evelyn did not break down. She did not shed a single tear, nor did she call her relatives to complain about her daughter's disrespect. She stepped into her kitchen, brewed a dark cup of black tea, walked into her private home office overlooking the East River, and booted up her encrypted workstation terminal. Greg stealing the Porsche was an brazen act of disrespect, but Evelyn's intelligence background told her it was merely a single symptom of a much larger structural threat. For the last 2 years, Evelyn had allowed Sarah to remain comfortably tethered to her personal assets. When Arthur passed away from sudden heart failure, Evelyn had established a joint emergency checking account at a private bank in Manhattan, strictly intended for catastrophic life events. She had naively assumed her daughter carried the same financial integrity and discipline that Evelyn had maintained throughout her federal career. Evelyn logged into the secure banking portal and pulled up the detailed transaction history for that specific joint account. As the encrypted records decrypted on her high-resolution monitor, her eyes narrowed. The financial evidence was glaring and damning. A $300 transaction at a luxury spa in Soho. $400 at an elite auto detailing shop in Brooklyn. A recurring monthly payment of $250 for a premium sports broadcasting package delivered directly to their luxury apartment in Williamsburg. They were not merely struggling to survive in New York. They were actively funding an artificial, high-society lifestyle off Evelyn's defense pension and emergency reserves. Evelyn opened a second tab and pulled up the digital deed and lease agreement for the Williamsburg apartment unit. Evelyn owned the real estate outright, having acquired it decades ago as an investment property. She had permitted Sarah and Greg to reside there 2 years ago under a strict written agreement. They were to cover the monthly building maintenance, municipal property taxes, and a heavily discounted rental rate. Evelyn navigated to the building management system. Her daughter and son-in-law were 3 months delinquent on building fees and property obligations. Official warning notices had been issued to Greg's primary email address, and he had simply buried them, allowing astronomical late penalties and legal warnings to stack up against Evelyn's clean title. They viewed Evelyn not as a grieving mother or a veteran of life, but as an endless, silent corporate treasury. They mistook her calm demeanor for domestic weakness, assuming her quiet widowhood meant she would absorb their parasitic behavior forever. Evelyn took a slow, deliberate sip of her black tea. The period of parental leniency was officially terminated. With precise, deliberate keystrokes, Evelyn accessed the administrative settings of her private banking portal. Within 30 seconds, she revoked Sarah's status as an authorized user, severing her access completely. She executed a full wire transfer of the remaining funds into her private treasury account at a separate institution, leaving an exact balance of $0.00. Next, she opened her primary telecommunications portal. Sarah and Greg were both attached to her high-tier corporate cellular plan, operating under the promise that they would reimburse her monthly. They had not transferred a single dollar since the previous year. Evelyn clicked on their assigned IMEI numbers and initiated an immediate hard suspension of line service. Finally, she returned to the Williamsburg property management portal. Evelyn removed her primary credit details from the automatic utility payment systems, unlinked her corporate accounts, and flagged the tenant portal to reflect default status directly to the occupants. She did not need to scream, dramatize, or hire aggressive Manhattan trial lawyers. She simply turned off the power grid to their entire existence. Once the financial perimeter was secured, Evelyn picked up her phone and dialed a private driver and heavy recovery service based near the Brooklyn Navy Yard, a specialized company run by former military transport logistics personnel. "Marcus," Evelyn spoke clearly into the receiver. "It's Evelyn Telles." "Evelyn," the deep voice responded instantly. "What do you need?" "I need a heavy flatbed dispatched to the upper deck of the Queensboro Bridge, westbound towards Queens, just past the mid-span support tower. My Carrera is sitting on the shoulder with a remote fuel lockout engaged. Bring it directly back to my Dumbo residence." "Understood," Marcus replied without asking unnecessary questions. "Do we have key access or do we need flat deck dollies?" "The key fob is hidden under the driver's seat." "Charge the tactical recovery fee to my primary file and secure the vehicle immediately." Evelyn hung up. The complete liquidation of their parasitic apparatus had taken precisely 22 minutes. Her heart rate remained at a steady, resting 60 beats per minute. She felt no regret, no guilt, and no emotional hesitation. She felt the cold, grounding clarity of total tactical control returning to her life. 2 hours later, the low rumble of a heavy-duty diesel recovery engine resonated through the quiet cobblestone street outside her loft. Evelyn stepped out onto her elevated iron balcony just as Marcus's crew carefully aligned the flatbed, lowering the gleaming black Porsche gently onto her private driveway. The vehicle was completely untouched. As the recovery specialists unhooked the hydraulic transport chains, a battered gray rideshare vehicle pulled aggressively up to the curb. Greg stepped out, slamming the door so hard the sound reverberated off the brick walls of the surrounding warehouses. His designer suit was disheveled, his silk tie was hanging loose around his collar, and his face was flushed with embarrassment and rage. He marched up the concrete walkway, pointing a shaking finger directly at Evelyn. "Do you have any idea how utterly humiliating that was?" Greg shouted, attempting to use his height and volume to intimidate her in the open courtyard. "I was stranded on the Queensboro Bridge during rush hour for over an hour. I missed the most critical venture capital lunch of my entire career." Evelyn did not step back. She calmly signed Marcus's digital tablet, nodded her thanks to the recovery crew, and waited until the massive flatbed truck pulled away down Washington Street before addressing her son-in-law. "You missed a business lunch," Evelyn replied, her voice smooth and razor-sharp. "You should consider yourself exceptionally fortunate that you aren't spending the next 5 years in a state penitentiary for grand theft auto. I didn't steal it." "Sarah said I could take it for the afternoon," Greg yelled, puffing out his chest. Evelyn reached into her trench coat, pulled out the printed invoice from the Transport Recovery Service, and held it up between them. "This emergency transport cost $450. I deducted it from the joint account before I terminated the account permanently." Greg stopped his aggressive posturing. His arrogant expression collapsed into total confusion. "Wait. What do you mean close the account? How are we supposed to pay for our groceries and expenses this week?" "I strongly suggest you figure that out with immediate urgency," Evelyn said quietly. She stepped past him, opened the driver's side door of her Porsche, and settled into the hand-stitched leather seat. She pressed the start button, and the twin-turbo engine roared to life with a fierce, mechanical growl. Evelyn backed the machine smoothly into her private garage, hit the remote close button, and left Greg standing completely isolated on the cold concrete. Early the next morning, as the sun began to illuminate the skyline over the East River, Evelyn's private phone vibrated on her marble counter. The incoming caller ID displayed the name of her son, David. Unlike Sarah, David was an independent structural engineer who lived and worked out of Chicago, having built his own life without relying on family handouts. "Mom. Are you all right?" David asked immediately, his tone laced with genuine concern. "I am perfectly fine, David." "Why do you ask?" "Sarah just called me in an absolute panic," David explained, exhaling heavily through the line. "She was screaming that you lost your mind. She claimed you stranded Greg on a bridge in the middle of traffic, locked her out of your home, and shut off their phone service just to punish them over a car." David paused. "She asked me to wire her $2,000 for rent and living expenses." Evelyn walked over to her floor-to-ceiling window, looking out toward the Manhattan Bridge. "Did you send it?" "No," David replied firmly without a second of hesitation. "I know who you are, Mom. You don't execute a lockdown like that over a minor argument." "What actually happened down there?" Evelyn did not exaggerate or add emotional drama. She laid out the cold, unvarnished facts: the suspended driver's license, the unauthorized vehicle theft, the months of secret account depletion, and the mounting building, defaults on the Williamsburg property. David remained silent for a long moment as the full reality of his sister's deception settled in. When he finally spoke, his voice was entirely devoid of sympathy for Sarah. "Good for you, Mom. It's about time someone brought them back to reality. She will try to paint me as a cruel, unfeeling mother to the rest of the extended family," Evelyn noted casually. "Let her try," David countered sharply. "If she calls me again with her hand out, I'm blocking her number entirely. You take care of yourself, Mom." "Do you need me to fly down to New York?" "No, my son," Evelyn said, feeling a quiet sense of pride in the independent man David had become. "I have everything under total control." With her son's confirmation reinforcing her operational boundary, Evelyn moved to complete the final phase of her cleanup. Over the past several years, Sarah and Greg had systematically converted the lower storage basement of Evelyn's loft into their personal holding facility. There were dozens of heavy plastic bins containing out-of-season designer attire, expensive athletic equipment Greg insisted he would use, and imported furniture pieces that couldn't fit into their apartment. Evelyn spent the entire afternoon systematically moving every single item belonging to them out of her building. She did not rush. Working with disciplined efficiency, She staged every box, bin, and piece of equipment across the private exterior courtyard, neatly aligned under the waterproof architectural awning. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, a high-security locksmith arrived, dispatched from a commercial firm in Manhattan. Within 45 minutes, every deadbolt, electronic keypad, and perimeter access lock on the loft had been completely replaced and re-encrypted. At precisely 5 o'clock, Evelyn drafted a single, final text message to Sarah using a secondary secure line. Your personal belongings have been staged in the exterior courtyard. All physical access keys and security codes to this residence have been altered. As of the 1st of next month, all building fees, taxes, and operational utilities for the Williamsburg property are your sole financial responsibility. If those obligations fall into legal default, the building management will file a lien, and I will place the apartment on the real estate market for immediate sale. Plan your financial affairs accordingly. Evelyn did not wait for a desperate response. She switched the device to absolute silence, poured herself a fresh glass of iced tea, and sat down in her leather armchair with a book on classic military logistics. For the first time since Arthur's passing, the physical space of her home felt entirely purified. The lingering anxiety of unexpected intrusions and subtle financial exploitation had been neatly boxed up and cast outside where it belonged. They arrived at 7 o'clock that evening. Evelyn observed the bright LED headlights of Greg's leased commuter car slice through the dark cobblestones of the alleyway. She did not rise from her chair. She simply picked up her tablet and pulled up the high-definition live security feed of the front courtyard. Sarah and Greg stood beneath the courtyard lights, staring in absolute shock at the massive wall of stored items. Sarah's face was twisted in anger, her hands clenched into tight fists at her sides. Greg looked entirely defeated, his posture slumped as the reality of his liquidated safety net finally shattered his ego. Sarah stepped forward and slammed her hand violently against the reinforced oak front door. "Mom, open this door!" Sarah screamed, her voice carrying through the quiet Brooklyn night. "You can't just throw our personal property outside like trash. We have nowhere to put any of this." Evelyn tapped the two-way audio command button on her tablet screen. Her calm, crisp voice projected clearly through the concealed exterior speakers. "I suggest you rent a secure self-storage unit in Long Island City," Evelyn responded smoothly. Sarah gasped, spinning around to face the camera lens mounted near the lintel. "You cut off our cellular service. We don't even have data connectivity to look up a facility. How are we supposed to cover the building fees next week? You know Greg's corporate commission check hasn't cleared. That sounds like a private financial management issue between a husband and a wife," Evelyn stated with absolute detachment. "It is no longer the responsibility of an independent mother. You are choosing a cold piece of machinery over your own daughter," Sarah shrieked, tears of pure rage spilling over her cheeks. "No, Sarah," Evelyn answered, her voice cutting through the damp evening air like a blade. "I am choosing my absolute peace over your continuous disrespect. Do not return to this property uninvited again. Take your possessions and clear my courtyard." Greg reached out and grabbed Sarah's arm, pulling her back forcefully. He had finally recognized the icy, unyielding tone of a mother who would no longer be manipulated. "Let's go, Sarah," Greg muttered, his voice trembling. "She isn't going to open the door." "It's over." Evelyn watched the security feed in complete silence as the two of them began loading the heavy storage bins into the back of their vehicle. Their long-held arrogance collapsing under the weight of real-world accountability. 30 days passed without a single attempt at communication from Sarah or Greg. Stripped of their financial safety net, they miraculously discovered the means to satisfy the Williamsburg building fees. Selling off Greg's custom golf gear and Sarah's collection of luxury handbags to meet their obligations. They were finally forced to learn the basic laws of survival in an unforgiving city. Evelyn woke up on a crisp, clear Saturday morning. The autumn air carrying the clean, sharp scent of the ocean off the New York harbor. She dressed in a simple cashmere sweater and tailored trousers, picked up her leather driving gloves, and walked down into her private garage. The Carrera sat gleaming flawlessly under the recessed overhead lights. Evelyn unlocked the vehicle, slid into the low driver's seat, and pressed the engine start button. The twin-turbo engine fired instantly, filling the enclosed space with a deep, authoritative mechanical roar. There were no system warnings, no unauthorized tracking anomalies, and no domestic complications, only a full tank of fuel and an open highway ahead. She operated the garage door control and backed the high-performance car smoothly out onto the pristine cobblestones. Evelyn did not require a court order to reclaim her independence. She did not need civil validation to enforce her boundaries. She simply required the unwavering resolve to stop enabling those who treated her generosity as an entitlement. She had spent decades building and protecting a family, and somewhere along the line, they had mistaken her quiet demeanor for weakness. Evelyn shifted the Porsche into gear, guiding the vehicle smoothly out of the alley. Leaving Dumbo behind, as she accelerated onto the open pavement of the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway heading south toward the open coast of Long Island. The morning sun broke over the skyline, casting a brilliant, golden light across the metallic hood of her car. She lowered the window slightly, letting the sharp, invigorating ocean wind fill the cabin. She was completely alone, completely self-reliant, and for the first time in many years, profoundly excited for the road ahead.